All right, here we go.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for coming. It's a bit of a weird time, isn't it? 2 o'clock on a Saturday, but we have to fit it in somewhere or the other, and it seems to be the best. So yeah, I'd like to welcome Mark, who's gonna chat. You may have been listening in on what we were saying, but I mean, Mark's been the chair of documentary group. Now we're thinking for 4 years, wasn't it, Mark?
Close to, I
Close
think.
to 4 years.
Feels like 40. But...
That's like 40. And he's also he's telling me the first person to get an FRPS in documentary, which is something that I'm sure we're interesting about. And I was looking at his webpage earlier, and he's got many awards, including 2015 RPS Documentary Photographer of the Year and runner-up the year before. And we're also just saying he's got quite an interest for a number of features about repair and reuse of things, which is quite interesting and topical at the moment. So I'll hand over to you, Mark. Look forward to it.
Thanks very much, Jeff, and everybody who's joined us here. Southeast Group and pseudo Southeast Group, I'll call it, as I know some of you are much further away than that. Yeah, what I'm going to do, I think I'm going to talk for about 45 minutes. I'm going to keep track. My mouse has done what it said it was not going to do. Nasty little thing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just do a very quick whistle stop documentary group, just give you guys and gals a little bit of an update as to what we're doing there, just so that you know. And then from my own sort of personal viewpoint, I will just quickly go through some early work. I will cover also then my F panel and current projects. And then if anybody's got any questions, feel free. So with that, documentary group, just to make people aware, one of the things that we have been doing within the documentary group now, actually, I think we're still probably the only group that actually does this, but we actually put together a plan several years ago that tried to lay out what are we doing and why are we doing it and how does this help the RPS. And we updated it the back end of last year to align with the RPS's new strategic plan. Trying to make sure that what we are doing sort of makes sense and we're not trying to take on too much and do things that might not be necessarily of value. But to give you an idea of what we've got up and running at the moment. So by the way, that plan is on the website. I think it's under the about section on the RPS website for the documentary group. But what have we got coming up? Well, we're continuing our engagement talk series. So in the next few months, we've got 6 talks. We've got Roy Mehta next week. Roy was one of our judges, Documentary Photographer of the Year. He is also a senior lecturer at University of the Arts London, LCC, in documentary. We've got Carolyn Mendelsohn doing an update of her work. She gave a talk to Contemporary a couple of years ago, but I've roped her into giving an update talk. And then we've got Jack Lowe with his pretty amazing project, which is the lifeboat station project. He's going to photograph every single lifeboat station in the British Isles. And just to make his life incredibly difficult, he's doing the whole thing using the wet collodion process, which is the same process that Roger Fenton used 100x years ago. And then to round off what I would call like this season, in other words, we're planning to stop around April time with these. We're finishing up with a couple of people who do the occasional or have done the occasional bit of documentary photography once in a blue moon. We've got a character called Martin Parr, who allegedly was at Manchester once, David Hearn and Nick Hedges. So basically 3 of probably the foremost documentary photographers in the UK over the last 20-30 years. We've got all of them lined up to give talks in March and April of this year. So we're really, really pleased about that. We're going to do something a little bit different with Martin and David and Nick. They're not going to be them just giving a talk and showing slides. We're going to make it much more of an interview, so there'll be a lot more engagement there for those.
Can I ask something, Mark?
Yes.
And a lot of these engagement talks fall on a Thursday evening, which is a bit inconvenient for some of us. Are they going to be recorded?
No. I'll have a chat with Val. Yeah, I've not been hugely successful at recording them in the past, but yeah, we could maybe have a go at that. I'll need to double check that the photographers are okay with them being recorded first, though. but I'll ask Val to do that. Yeah, apologies. I mean, the reason we tend to pick the Thursday is, I mean, we all got the same problem. It just happens to be one of the few days where I'm reasonably confident I can make it and Val can make it. And as we're running the events, it sort of tends to take priority. But anyway, over and above those, what have we got? We've got, we're still running workshops. They're in 3 parts. I know a few of the people who are on have been on those. We've got a couple more of those coming up between now and then. We're going to probably close them down for the summer. I think probably everybody here knows, we did a major expansion of our Documentary Photography of the Year exhibition, competition back end of last year, as well as a members section or category. We've actually had both a student category and an open category. And as I was telling Jeff a few minutes ago, if you sort of look over my shoulder, about there, you'll see a load of black boxes. That will, by the end of next week, be the exhibition ready to tour. So it is currently filling my hall. And that's going to go out. And Harry, who's joined us, is been working with regions and regional subgroups. It starts in Oxford in a few weeks' time. It then goes to the House of Photography, Fujifilm in London, then up to Newcastle, then across to the Oriole in Colwyn Bay. Then it goes up to Scotland, to Inverness and Glasgow, and it finishes up in Chippenham sometime around October. So it's a fairly significant undertaking to try and get that out. And what we're trying to do is encourage all of those regions that have got the exhibition in their location to actually put some events on as well, coincident with it. As an example, I'm trying to now suggest to a couple of local photography camera clubs I know, as well as the London region, that actually for something like the 6 weeks that we are in House of Photography with Fujifilm, they basically said if we want to put any event on in there while we're there, we can do. And all we just got to do is just organise it and let them know. Take the opportunity, I think, is what we're trying to tell the regions where we've got that. Decisive Moment online magazine, that is due out, fingers crossed, beginning of next week. That will focus on Documentary Photography of the Year in this next edition. And again, we're going to try and keep it coming out on a quarterly basis. Our newsletters are a bit hit and miss, but we generally tend to put them out when we need to promote events. And I think really, just to remind it, our focus as a core group will really be to do stuff like this, and we'll leave the subgroups, the regional subgroups like yourselves, to get on and do what you want to do and support you as and where you need that support. And we are planning, I've got our new secretary, Nick Lynette, to try and organise a meeting with each of the regional subgroups. We're going to try and get a Zoom meeting together with you sometime, really just to talk through what else can we do to help you. Are there any other things that we should be thinking about doing in the centre that helps those regional subgroups either put more events on or do different types of events or whatever? But we can talk about that when we have that meeting, which I'm hoping will be in the next sort of 4 to 6 weeks or so. So Nick's trying to get that set up in the next few weeks. So that's sort of what we're up to. We don't try and interfere or get too hands-on with what each of the regional subgroups are doing. We tend to let them get on and do what they want to do locally. I think that's the whole point of them. But if they need help and support, we're happy to do that. And it depends on the group. There are some groups where we post all their events for them on the website. You guys have got more than enough capability and can do it yourselves, but not every subgroup can do that. So sometimes I'll get an email saying, can you help us post this or whatever? And we're more than happy to do that. It's just not an issue. So that's the group. We've got a reasonably good group of volunteers at the moment, obviously including all the regional subgroups. The only area that I think we're really lacking at the moment and we're struggling a little bit with is around social media. But we've got Wayne, who's one of our new volunteers, stepping in, trying to get that up and running. But none of us, I don't think, are experts in best use of social media. But we're going to try and get that resurrected again. That's probably the main area that we're struggling with. So if you know anybody who's really, really good at social media, please get them to email me. And that's the end of my advert. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is talk a little bit about my own work. I've sort of called it intent, and hopefully that will become apparent as we go forward. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to just very quickly whiz through, as I said, sort of like my earlier work. I'll then talk about the F panel, and then I will then move on to my current project and what I'm doing on it and why I'm doing what I'm doing. So early work, I mean, I started photography when I was a teenager, a long time ago. Like many, it was all black and white film, FP4, HP5, etc. And then I lost all that work. It disappeared somewhere along the line, apart from a few strips of negatives I've managed to find, where my parents were house moving. So it all got left at home and it all got lost. But I switched in the 80s to essentially almost all either Kodachrome 64 or I do my own processing on Ektachrome. So I have in my loft more boxes of yellow perils than I know what to do with. It's literally full of yellow boxes of Kodachrome. One day I will get around to sorting them out. But I was typically at that time doing predominantly travel type photography as I was young and free enough and had money to actually travel around. That changed as we moved to digital. I did a lot of color events type work, you name it. And then I went back for a period to doing black and white work. And you mentioned that I did win Documentary Photographer of the Year or back in about 2015. And this was actually a couple of images from that series. The series was called Under Par. And it was basically a load of people visiting an exhibition of Martin Parr's work. And the reason it's in black and white is if it had been in color, then Martin Parr's work would have over dominated all the images. But it really was just reflections on people's response to Martin Parr's work. And this is actually some of his early black and white work. So that was like quite typical of what I was doing, what we're looking at now 7 years ago. So I went through this, I did street type stuff and then I did travel and I tended to do like mini projects. And the thing I think I'd say would characterize all of these is they were typically only projects that I did for, you know, there were 1, 2, 3 days worth of work. There wasn't a lot of depth to them in terms of the project itself. They were tended to be quite serendipitous. And there's another example of that. You know, as I was traveling around, I was in Stuttgart a few years ago, saw all these policemen and thought, oh, I'll follow that. And it actually turned out to be a march by large migrant Turkish community. Unfortunately, at the same time, the Kurds also decided to turn up, as did the communists and the anarchists. So it actually went from being a very heavily policed march to literally close to anarchy. The police got beaten up, etc. But that was typical me, typical serendipity. I enjoyed doing it. It was nice to try and create a story out of it, but I was beginning to feel this was like lacking depth, for want of a better word. So I started to almost like, you know, rethink myself. What do I really want to do? What is documentary photography? How should I be approaching it going forward? And I think this is something that I know Stuart's seen some of these before, and we use some of this sort of in and around the workshops we run now. But I've sort of said that, well, the thing we've got to be careful of is, and by the way, I see this appear on Facebook every now and again, can somebody define documentary? I would say it's actually bloody difficult to define, because you can argue that almost taking literally, you know, anything that's documenting someone, something, someplace is documenting. I think what distinguishes documentary, and certainly we as the RPS documentary group, we've deliberately aligned with what the distinctions group, with what distinctions have done, and we use the documentary communicates a clear narrative through visual literacy, and then you apply that to whether it's documentation of social, cultural, historical, political, etc. But the key thing here is it's not just documentation, it's actually creating a narrative, and that being able to build that narrative is really, really important. My own view is, if we're doing documentary work, there should really always be some intent. You know, it's not just a random series of photographs that document something. If you think about it, if you're going to tell a story, if you're going to create some narrative, there has to be sort of some intent or purpose to it, whether it is just representing or exploring a subject that you think people need to be aware of to help challenge people or get them to deepen their thinking, or even maybe influence people's opinions. There's a couple of quotes here that I quite like as well, because I think it sort of sums up where I think as well, which is that documentary photography, it's not pure art, it's not pure fact, it's somewhere in the middle. It's something that elicits stories, stimulates ideas. And I think, like most serious photography, and a lot of documentary photography is serious, the technical part is actually relatively easy. And the aesthetic bit's hard, but actually making sure that you're doing this in a sort of ethical way is even harder. And I think there are stages that you learn as you take on and address documentary, other than just doing a documentation, for want of a better word. I use the word intent because for me, it actually summed up really where my own thinking is now about photography, which is, if you look at intent in the dictionary, as a noun, it means to have an intention or a purpose, planning to do something. But intent as an adjective also means giving all your attention to something. And I think that's really, really important. I think to do good documentary work, it has to be something that you are quite passionate about, that you are prepared to do, to work at and go back and do again and again and again and again to get a really, really, really good story. Turning up to an event at a weekend, taking a few snaps, is probably not going to deliver a meaningful documentary project. And I know from speaking to people like Simon Leach, who is the chair of the documentary distinctions assessment panel, I've seen and heard him, say repeatedly that it's quite evident sometimes when they're assessing panels whether this is genuinely, an in-depth, really thoughtful body of work that they can see that people have researched and put work and effort into, or it's people who've just turned up and shot things at the weekend. It becomes very evident to them, and that latter, they don't tend to get the A's or the F's. There's an expectation around the work that it's something that's has had a significant amount of effort, energy, thought has gone into, and that certainly informs the way that that I approach things. Typically, if I'm thinking about a project, I actually did a PhD some years ago, and I tend to use my approach to documentaries quite analogous to the way I would expect to do a piece of research. There is a planning bit at the beginning, which is really trying to get clear in my head, what's this about, what's the story, who's it for. I will then tend to do research looking at who else may have covered this subject before as a photographer. As a result of that, I have a lot of photography books. I will also, though, look at the subject itself and look at what sources information is available either online or through libraries, etc. And then that helps inform what I think I want to do around the types of images I want to make that I think are right for telling the story of this project. We all know that it won't be exactly this, but it gets me started and it gets me focused. And then I start the work of, making the photographs, gathering information. I always take notes whenever I go. I collect complementary information or images or ephemera or whatever as I do it. And then after that, you have this hard decision to make. Right, I think I've got enough. You start the process of editing, paring down the images that you've got to be the best to help you with the narrative and get them in the right sequence. And then looking at ways of getting it out there. And obviously, depending on whether you're disseminating this thing for an exhibition or it's going in a magazine or it's going online, that will influence the way you actually do the editing and sequencing. It looks linear, and we all know it doesn't work that way. You go round and round and round, it iterates. But there is, at the end of the day, you end up tracking this route, even though you're going around in circles quite a lot, and you'll go down dead ends and you'll suddenly find you need to do some more research. But for me, this is typically the process I'm following as I'm looking to build a story that I then want to put out somewhere, whether it be on the website, whether it be supporting actually newspaper articles, or to work with other groups who are looking to put some visual work out to support their own stories. I'll tend to work in this approach. I said a couple of minutes ago that one of the things about documentary photography is it's neither art nor is it sort of what I would call straight. I don't know how you want to describe it, but anyway, it sort of sits in between the two, and I think that has an important context in terms of the type of images that are good for documentary photography. I do see a lot of work that comes into us in the documentary group, particularly work that was coming in maybe for inclusion in in Decisive Moment, or when we were running our bi-monthly, was what I would describe as quite literal work. And I think that's fine, but actually if the entire series is that, it can create some issues. So I tend to think, well, what creates value? And I think it creates value where we're helping to inform people of some reality. And there's at two extremes, there's two types of images that you could take. You could take the sort of didactic, literal sort of eyewitness photojournalistic approach, which is important, or, and increasingly these days with documentary photography, we take these more ambiguous images. We leave what's called some cognitive space for the viewer to bring their own imagination and context to the images. And so the answer, to this question is, it's somewhere in between, and it's a mix of these. I mean, if the whole thing is highly ambiguous to the point of abstraction, we're probably going to lose the viewer. If everything's very didactic and very literal, we're going to bore the viewer. And the answer is somewhere in between the two. And we're trying to look at, and in here I just sort of described some of the, the approaches that photographers use to the sort of the ambiguous image. They're either using a sort of visual metaphor, or they're maybe looking at some associative detail, so it doesn't necessarily require as big a leap, or they use part of something to represent the whole. And if you look at nearly all photography, particularly some of the greats in documentary, you'll see, you can almost go through and you can analyze the images, and you can see that this is a regular and consistent use. Not everything falls into the didactic category, although obviously used to do many years ago, but the whole area has moved on. So I tend to sort of try and bear that in mind in terms of the way I work. And to give an example, I'm actually now going to show my own fellowship panel, just to give you, it's an insight into the way I work, but also hopefully sort of explains some of the things that I've just sort of quickly touched on. So this is the hanging plan for that fellowship panel. I decided only to put in 20 images, not 21. And I decided I wanted 2 lines of 10 rather than messing around creating 4 3/7s, or sorry, not 3/7s, yeah, 3/7s or a 6/7/7 or whatever, because I wanted this almost to be just a story that you read across, and then the next chapter almost like, or the next bit that you just read across. So I wanted to keep it very simple. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to just go through the images so that you can see the panel, and I'll come back to the hanging plan in a minute, and I'll try and explain why some of the sequencing was sequenced the way it was. So the statement was, and the project was, it's a world apart, they are the same. I'm not going to read the whole of this thing out, but essentially I explored Havana and New York. They're both very dense spaces. They're actually spaces with not huge amounts of green in them, other than obviously Central Park in the middle of New York. But actually, other than that, there's not a lot of green around, and there's virtually none in Old Havana. But what you'll find in both of these locations are these sort of small, often hidden behind walls or fenced-in sports areas. In Havana, they're literally homemade. They're as rough as hell. There's bits of paint marking them out, and that's about it. In America, they spent billions creating these very well-maintained, very equipped courts. There's something like, I think, 2,500 of these across the whole of the 5 metropolitan boroughs of New York. But the important thing is, in both of them, they're spaces to compete, to exercise, socialize, or just escape the sort of pressures of the city. And so superficially, places like New York and Havana may seem a world apart, politically, financially, etc. But when you look in these spaces, in essence, they're the same. And there's a sort of a little bit of, I guess, of a political message in here that says it's very easy for people to point fingers and look at the other and make these contrasts. But, deep down, people looking and living and working in cities, they all want roughly the same thing. They want to have a reasonable life, but they also need these spaces to escape the pressures that those urban centers bring. So this series was about 3 to 4 years in the making, multiple visits, So it wasn't the most environmentally friendly project I've ever done. But what I will say in my defense is about half of the trips that I used to make this, I found another excuse to travel and then did the project on the back of it. So I always had another reason to travel other than just going and doing this photography. So the opening image is this one. It's footballers in a sort of urban park area. The next image is the same, but I've just sort of contrasted it. And then we move to a handball park. And in fact, both in New York and Havana, handball is very much a sort of street, working class sport that you'll see a lot of around both cities. And then this is probably the weirdest image in the entire series, but this is actually a handball area in Havana. I liked it because it sort of was a bit of a Mark Rothko type view of the world, and you can see the dirty mark across that. That's where people literally fall into the wall as they're actually playing the shots. It's a bit like squash, but you play it with your hands. And this is Umberto, one of those players in that same location in Havana. And then we've got handball players. Actually, this time they're in New York. And this is one of those areas, but being used to play sort of a racquetball. And this is one of those serendipitous shots that if you look at it, you suddenly realize that actually the face that's up here isn't a face. It's actually the top of the other person's head. I'd actually rejected that shot when I first looked at it. And it was only years, probably 2-3 years later, I was going back through and I'm like, oh, hang on a minute, that isn't his face, it's somebody's head. I thought, I think I want to include that because it's just a bit weird. And it will also be a challenge to see if people even spot it. Again, I'm looking at, handballers deliberately put this shot in because it sort of begs the question, well, where was it taken? And I wanted to do that. I didn't necessarily want it to be obvious where every shot was taken. This one's a lot more obvious in terms of where it was taken, but I wanted to show something of the, these are fenced in areas. So this is the Mondrian picture. We've had Rothko, now we've gone Mondrian just to get a bit more art in there. And then how these spaces are used. We were looking here at a space in Havana, and through every one of those 4 grids that you can see at the back, that's actually somebody's house. They're the windows into somebody's house, and they just look straight out onto this area that was a building that's been converted into a basketball court. And this is the same basketball court from a different perspective. This was actually a basketball club doing training. The facilities are primitive, but at the end of the day, it worked, and the kids absolutely loved it. Had a great time. Back to football, similar area. I got to know. Actually, can't quite. There's a guy climbing the steps in behind here. I actually got to know this guy Junior really, really, really well. He's their local football coach, and he was incredibly proud. I remember going back there. It would have been mid 2019, before we all got locked down, etc. And I actually did a whole series of photography out there, but mainly for them, almost as a little way of saying thank you. And he was really, really proud of the fact that something like, I think, 5 of the Cuban national youth team had all been discovered playing on this concrete block in the middle of Havana. And he was the coach to a couple of the teams that were there. Again, I tend to be one of these people that doesn't have any problems chopping people in half. I'm quite happy to do that because it can create a sense of ambiguity over what's going on. And often you really don't need the whole person in there to get a sense of what the thing's about. So you'll see quite a lot of that in my images. Again, another area in Cuba. This entire piece of metal you see here was the gym. They could do lots and lots and lots of exercises just off this one bit of metal. Same place. I think this image, though, was taken 2 years later. And that's about the only environmental portrait that I've got. I did actually say to the guy, I asked him beforehand, is he okay? And it was like, yeah. And he was looking across at me, and I just thought, I've got to take that image. Most of them are shot sort of like late afternoon. This one wasn't. The sun was out and quite strong. And then this was just simply a case of, I just wanted to shoot something different. So I just shot the shadows and people's feet. And what I was looking at here was more, can I create a sort of an impression of what's going on without it being blindingly obvious? And the same with this one, actually shot in the same location, probably a year later at a different time of day. So, you know, again, I don't necessarily want to have obvious literal images in here. You can see what's going on. You don't necessarily need to see the actual person or even all of them to get a sense of what's happening. Similar, chopping people up seems to be my way. This is back in central New York, in Chinatown. Again, handball area. And I'm just going to quickly go, and this is the last one. Again, this is a handball area, an area that's actually known as the cage. Literally the other side of this fence is the cage, which is a basketball area, which can only be described as a place you go into and you're extremely careful when you do. I mean, the whole area, it was quite tough. I saw quite a few fights there, and I certainly wouldn't want to have been involved in any of those fights. I would have lost very, very quickly. And it actually took me several days of going back to this place to actually build up enough of a rapport with the individuals that they allowed me to go in and actually take photographs. When I first went in there, I was met with quite a few expletives. I think I was literally the only white guy in there. I was met with a few expletives, something along the lines of, what the are you doing here? Da, 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 da. And it was only when I actually went and sat down with one of the people and just watched a game. And then I actually took some photographs out of my bag that I'd shot in Cuba, and I showed them the handball photographs I'd taken. And they got quite interested in it. And then they went and showed us some of the other people around. And then suddenly they were like, oh, okay, that's what you do. Oh, okay, come on, then you can take a few photographs of us. And then, of course, as soon as I started taking photographs of this small group, other people allowed me. But it took me over a period of, I think, about 5 days to build up enough rapport with the individuals that they allowed me to do it, which is why I said I think it's really, really important when we're doing work that we don't think this is something we can just drop in a weekend, do the shoot and go. So back to the series. I'm trying to keep an eye on the time. I need to speed up a little bit. What I tried to do in this is I deliberately wanted to intersperse the two series. I didn't want to do the obvious thing to do, which is to put, say, all the Cuban images together and then all the New York images together and say, there you go, compare and contrast them. I basically wanted the story to be more of a visual story rather than words. And so if you look at the way they're sequenced, I've been playing with the I'm big into sort of shapes, sort of like quite graphic. And if you look at the way the images are structured, if you look at number 1 and you look at where the shadows are, where the people are, then what I've effectively got in number 2, it's almost like the light bit follows, but I've actually spun everything else around. And you've now got, you know, the players in the light as a part of the dominant subjects in the light versus the player that's actually in shadow. And then that sort of points down to the starting point for the third one, which has got no people in it at all as actual people. The only object that you see is the ball. Because I didn't feel you needed to see anything more than that, than to get the idea of, well, this is actually, you know, a ball court somewhere, and that's it. And then I needed to change scene a little bit. So I threw in the Rothko one as it's some sort of, it's almost like a placeholder. It's a much quieter shot. There's no action going on. And it obviously provides a segue then into the 5th shot, which is the same location, probably taken, my guess would be about a year different. But again, you don't see the ball in this one, because I don't think you need to necessarily see the ball to understand or have some sense of what's going on. And then sort of mirroring those shapes, I do the same thing in number 5. But what I've started to introduce now, so there's a sort of consistency across the type, what I'm trying to do with the images. By the time I've come into 5, I've started to use, and you'll see this recur quite a lot through there, this motif of the grid that's on the shadow on her arm. And this grid appears several times. You could almost like see there's a grid here in number 7 with the t-shirt that's being worn. eight's deliberately been thrown in because it looks like Cuba, but it's actually New York. And that's sort of part of the reinforcing you're not sure exactly where some of them are. And then, so I'm going to just need to move you guys across. Sorry, that's it, because you're not. And then I'm back to sort of graphic shapes and fences. And I've almost like, if you look at them here, almost like mirrored 9 and 10. If you look at the sort of the cross shapes, if you look at where the black horizontal is in 9, and you look at where things are blacked out in 10, you know, I've sort of like deliberately, without doing much more than a little bit of cropping, I've deliberately tried to make these sort of visually flow. And then we get into the series below. I've started to do some similar thing. I've sort of used some similar things here. So these are the same locations. You know, the blue has obviously got consistency, and there's a bit of a blue theme going through, just to try and create a connection between the shots so that they're not jumping around too much. The idea is there's a bit of a connection between them. And we can sort of see that between, say, 14 and 15. These are, in essence, pictures of similar things in different locations. In one, you see the person upside down. In the other one, the person here is actually doing like chin-ups, and you can't actually see the top of them. And then I follow that same pattern into 16. It's the same place, taken from a different angle. Then if you look at the shape of the metal in 16, and then you look at the shape of the shadow in 17 and then 18, there's a consistency to them, even though they're telling you different things about this space and the people and the conditions. And then we finish up with, oh, I've done what I didn't want to do. Sorry, bear me. I've hit the cursor at the wrong time. And then we finish up with Chinatown. Again, you know, the fence motif on the arm. And then we finish up with someone just looking through the fence at the end. So the visual, it's a visual narrative rather than there's a chronological story that's being used to build this. And if you look at work of, you know, a lot of the, you know, the more contemporary documentary photographers these days, that's quite common. There is no rules around the order. What's the beginning, what's the middle, what's the end? It's what you choose to make it. And I chose to make this rather than some sort of literal story. I wanted to do it visually. And so the links between the images are actually often visual in terms of either motifs or colors or sort of graphic structure. And that's the approach that I used. Okay, I'm conscious I'm going to run out of time, so I need to speed up. So very quickly, what am I doing now? Well, one of my visits to Cuba many years ago, I didn't want to take all of those stereotypical cliched Cuban images of rundown buildings and all the other stuff that we see, and the cars. And this is about the closest I got at the time to a car image. This just intrigued me. It was a classic Cuban car, bit of a Frankenstein really, because it had been repaired. It looked fine from a distance, but when you got close up, you realize it wasn't quite that good. And it came with its own, you know, built-in repair kit. The spanner wedged in the window, or the adjustable wedged in the window. And that sort of, for me, that just sort of summed the whole thing up. I thought, that's Cuba. They're continually repairing and maintaining things and keeping them going. And of course, that's all been driven by the economics and the embargo and everything else. And so that started my series, which is I'm still working on. I haven't quite finished it yet. The series is called Unbroken, but it's essentially looking at the concept of repair and it being essential. And it's focused very much now, although I look at repair in lots of different areas, it's much more focused around electronics and electricals than anything else. And the reason for that is that recycling is not sufficient, and in fact pretty much doesn't work. And I'll explain that as I quickly go through this series. So the series started in Cuba. This is a typical repair shop in Cuba. It started in Cuba because when I was there, Obama was still president of the United States. Cuba was beginning to open up. Obama was making overtures. And it looked to me like, you know, with the increase in tourism and everything else, this culture that had been in Cuba really, you know, throughout was about to disappear and be overtaken by consumerism. I thought, I need to record this for posterity, if for nothing else. Then Trump came to power and obviously everything changed. And the project actually then took several twists and turns, but I worked on it just in Cuba for probably about a year on a couple of visits. I think I maybe squeezed 3 in 1 year. And I had a local fixer who helped me with the language and introductions. And we went around photographing, people doing repair all around Havana and elsewhere in Cuba. But most of these are in and around Havana. This is an electric iron. This is people repairing cookers and fans. The guy at the back here is Ivan. I got to know really, really well. I'll tell an entire story about Ivan. And in fact, I've got an entire story around Ivan, but for tonight, or for today, I'm just going to zip through quickly and say, this is Ivan's workshop. This is Javier, who works for Ivan in that same workshop. They repair everything and anything. This guy here, Yalasan, he takes single-use lighters, turns them into refillable and reusable lighters. And, we just chuck those things away in this country. Modesto repairs umbrellas in the corridor outside of his home. And in fact, this umbrella, which he was waving around all the time, was repaired in about 20 minutes while I was taking his photographs and talking to him. The state it was in when he saw it, you think there's absolutely no way that's ever going to get used again. It was repaired and it was usable once he'd finished with it. And so, I started in Cuba, and then I had a couple of serendipitous moments where I ran into people and people started talking to me about what's happening in the UK and elsewhere. And so I decided this project actually needed to be not just about Cuba, but needed to look much more broadly at what are we really doing about repair? In Cuba, there is still a culture of repair, but we sort of lost that in the West, in America and in Europe. And we're just beginning to get it back again. But and we need to get it back for lots and lots and lots of reasons. So what are we doing? And Scandinavia, as often, are a little bit ahead of us. So I went out to see what they were up to in Scandinavia. Went to this place called Retuna in the middle of Sweden, where they have an entire shopping mall dedicated to reuse and repair and upcycling. And this is Maria upcycling an old lampshade. In Finland, they have an organization called Kerätyskeskus, which stands for Reuse Center. There are 8 of them in the city. And they will repair everything and anything that they can. And this is in here as an example of really, they do something very, very similar here to what you'll see in Cuba. So in Cuba, if they can't repair it, they will strip it and scavenge it for parts that are usable for repairs in the future. And they do exactly the same thing here in Finland. These are motors stripped out of washing machines so that they can do cheaper washing machine repairs in the future. They also do upholstery, and they use all sorts of offcuts and materials that maybe end of line and various other things for reupholstering furniture. And then we come to the UK, and I've been working with, I've particularly got this one in, I've been working with actually both the organizations that are represented by this photograph. So in the background and slightly blurred is Mike. He is an organizer and a repairer with an organization called the Restart Project in London, who are focused on electrical and electronic repair. Unfortunately, most devices that you want to repair these days, the manufacturers have put what are called security screws in them that make it really, really difficult for you to get into. And Apple have taken this to the extreme, and they designed a screw that's unique to themselves, known as the pentalobe screw. However, there are some good guys, and the good guys are called iFixit. And in front, you can see a toolkit here in black and blue. That's an iFixit toolkit. And iFixit are a firm that started in California. They've got a headquarters for Europe now in Stuttgart. They make toolkits to help you repair stuff, including toolkits with security screws in them. So you can get into your Apple devices or any other weird and wonderful screw that the manufacturer may have chosen to use. And I've been going to repair events at either repair cafes or the Restart Project now on and off for about 4 or 5 years as part of this. I will typically go do a shoot. I'll usually give them a few of the images on a Creative Commons license that they can use to promote their own stuff. And that all helps build up the story that I ultimately want to tell, which is not so much to focus on the problem of not repairing, but to focus on, look at all the solutions, look at all the things we could do. Why can't we do more? These repair cafes and Restart projects very much focus on getting the owner of whatever the thing is to work with the repairer. And part of that is about them becoming more confident and more aware of what can and can't be repaired, in the hope they'll get things repaired more in the future. And I'll just go into the very last few slides. I'll just explain a little bit why that's really, really important. As I said, a lot of electronic goods are actually not easy to recycle. we actually now know that less than 18% of all electronics and electricals are recycled properly. We actually don't know what happens to a lot of the rest of them. And whilst this is in Africa, what I can tell you is there's an enormous amount of uncontrolled recycling, as it's called. And this is an example of somebody in Africa, in Ghana, when I was out there some years ago, taking basically a load of old copper cables and various other things. They'll set light to them with the intent of burning off all of the insulation so they can recover the copper. It clearly is very damaging to the environment, people's health, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And whilst this is in Africa, and I'm not saying this is this isn't the only place where they have that problem, it happens in lots and lots of places where they don't have the technology. One of the issues is we in the West don't actually know where most of our waste goes. And some of it either intentionally or unintentionally gets exported to countries that don't have the capability to deal with it. So when people tell you they're recycling, the first question I'm asking, well, who's doing it and where they're doing it? And show me the evidence, because the likelihood is they won't have any. I've also been photographing commercial repairers. This is literally 75 yards from my house. It's a mother and daughter. It was at the time mother and daughter. Daughter's moved on to do other things now. iPhone, tablet, computer, repair shop. And yes, she actually does manage to repair it using those nails. Part of this is I've deliberately tried to make sure that I've got a lot of diversity in the people who I'm photographing repairing, because I don't want people to think, oh, the only people that repair are sort of old white males, because they're the only people who've got the skills anymore. Absolutely not. I've seen some repairs done by lots and lots and lots of group people. There are a lot of young people actually starting to get into it, which I think is great for the future. In fact, actually, this is Ronnie, the woman who runs that repair shop. And we actually did this as a lockdown shoot when we weren't allowed to go out and anywhere. When the first lockdown came in, repair shops were not deemed to be essential, and as a result, they all had to close. And then obviously we all realized that being able to stay connected was incredibly important. So thereafter, repair shops were allowed to open up. Last couple of, and then I'll shut up. Why is repair important? Well, that's the inside of a phone. Actually, I've taken this one apart. It did get put back together again, but I've since taken it apart again, with the screws all in the order that you have to remove them in order to take the thing apart properly. There's an enormous amount of, sorry, just bear me 2 seconds. Sorry about that. Someone decided they were going to start hoovering. The point being, this is incredibly complex. There are actually 55 screws inside this thing, 7 different sizes, 2 different types. They're not all Phillips head. They're a nightmare to actually repair. They can be repaired, but they're a nightmare to repair. It doesn't have to be that way. And as I said, so these were all my lockdown shots. If you think of that as a bit like a pie chart, that sort of represents, all of the electrical waste we typically have in electronics. The dark bit is the bit that we can't actually recycle properly. We don't know how it gets recycled. So it's a bit like the tip of an iceberg. The bit we recycle really masks the huge issue that we have around it. And the only real solution here is to actually repair more. Make the things last longer, which means we actually dig less of the planet up. So last two couple of slides, what have I been doing with the project? Well, because I've been starting to do a lot of work with this group called the Restart Project, you'll see quite a few of the images here. People have got t-shirts on with the word restart. I've also got one of those t-shirts now. A lot of the work we've actually put out into the media. So it's gone into a number of major newspapers, as well as being online with the BBC. Because I'm trying to work with them to help get that message out. The next part of the project that I'm doing now, it's done it again, sorry, bear me 2 seconds. Keeps doing this every now and again. The next part of the project now is I've got sort of several versions of the project as exhibitions. I don't want it to go into what I would call art galleries or photographic galleries. It's deliberately going into community-based spaces. And the reason for that is the audience for this is not what I would call the photographic community or the art world. The audience for this is the public and people who don't really know much about repair who might be interested in it, to try and engage and encourage them. So we put the exhibition on in Notting Hill at the back end of last year, and I did that in conjunction with the Restart Project, the local council, and a local repair community. It's currently in the Eco Village in Market Harborough. In fact, they've just asked me to extend it and keep it there for a couple of weeks longer. So that's actually in a space where the whole of that area is focused on sustainability. And in fact, they have their own little repair cabin there, and they run some of the repair events upstairs in this gallery space that they've got there, and the exhibition is up in that gallery space. So, and a lot of what I'm trying to do at the moment is getting out into communities and work with community groups doing this. Hopefully I will get it somewhere in Devon, probably Plymouth, in late April. And I'm in discussions at the moment to get it up into Manchester by October. And I want to tie that in for International Repair Day in October. And we're looking to try and get multiple repair groups together to run an event, and we'll put the exhibition on at the same time. And that's me done. So I've run slightly over, apologies. Any questions?
I thought that was fascinating, Mark. I always love to see people explain their panels, and I really enjoyed you taking us through that. So that's really good. So has anyone else got any questions for Mark?
Oh, can I ask about the finances and the economics behind repairing? Because we quite often find that the cost of repair is so high that it makes sense, in inverted commas, to just buy a new one.
Well, that's what the manufacturers will, absolutely, and that's what the manufacturers want you to do, of course, because that means they can sell another one and make more profit. You're absolutely right. That is one of the big issues. So part of the work I've been doing with the various repair communities, I've also started working with some of them in America as well, is to actually start to move much closer to what's called a right to repair. So European Union enacted a right to repair legislation a couple of years ago, and it only at the moment is limited to certain types of electronic device. But part of that is, if you think about it, if you want to repair something, you've got to have the tools, you've got to have the spares, and you've got to have the knowledge. And actually, these days, you've got to have one other thing, but I'll come to that in a second. So what they're trying to do through this legislation is essentially mandate to manufacturers that you've really got to make things, you've got to make knowledge available. You've got to either provide the tools if they're unique, and in other words, they can be bought if people want to use them. And you need to make the spares available at some sort of economic price so that people can look to repair and make their things last longer. France has gone one step further now, and it now demands that any electrical or electronic goods that you put on the market, we get those energy, how energy efficient is your product. You now in France also have to put one on that shows how repairable it is. So the idea is that consumers can start to make informed decisions about whether this thing is going to be repairable once its warranty runs out or not. But you're right, it's still a barrier. It's not something that's going to get fixed in a year or 2 or even 5, I don't think, but it's something we have to do. Because as it stands today, electronic waste is our fastest growing waste stream on the planet. We don't know where over 80% of it ends up. And unfortunately, a big chunk of it ends up just creating toxic waste somewhere. So it's happening. You're right about that problem. And of course, what they do in Cuba and what they were doing in Scandinavia to get over that to some extent was, if there were components within things that had become unrepairable that were reusable, they became a cheaper source of spares. You won't necessarily get a 5-year warranty with it if you do that. But I mean, when I was in Finland, they were carrying out repairs and they were giving people between a 3 and 12-month warranty on the things that had been repaired, even though they were using, say, a motor they'd taken out of something else. So you're right, it's a problem, but it is a problem we can get round in time, I think. And I think we have to if we want to have, if we actually want the planet not to be utterly destroyed.
Thanks.
When I say destroyed, I really do mean destroyed. That little mobile phone, that smartphone that we all have, which weighs less than a couple of 100 grams, requires over 30 kilos of the planet to be dug up to make it. And in the process of taking everything we've dug up, processing it and having to take it through all the chemistry to then we create 85 kilos of waste just to make one phone. It's not sustainable. But anyway, by the by. So that's the reason why I'm doing this project. I have got other projects I'm doing, but this is the most important one at the moment. And I'm actually working. I think the thing that makes this different from, say, many other projects is it's something I'm actually doing in collaboration with quite a lot of groups. And that's actually really, really nice because we can create like a win-win. It means I've got almost all the access I ever desire to do the project, which is often a difficult way of, a difficult part of doing projects is actually getting access. I have no problems with access for doing this project.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, so Mark, on your project, which was beautifully explained and described, and the images are superb, well done. And it's a very important subject you're looking at. I'm just wondering if there's a specific reason why it's really important to you personally.
I guess I think I would only say personally because one, well, my background is engineering to start with. So I sort of understand it, really understand it. I've done a lot of research into what goes on, the process. I've actually looked at the mining, the processing that's behind it. And my background is chemical or process engineering. So I really, really understand that. And I guess the reason why I'm passionate about it is it allowed me to marry three things together, I guess. One, engineering. Two, research. And as I said, it wasn't that many years ago I did a PhD relatively late in life. And three, photography. So it's like a perfect conjunction of those three things. And that's sort of what's motivated me. I mean, I always loved doing photography, but this allows me to combine the engineering and the research and photography and feel I can make a difference, as opposed to it just being a beautiful set of images. And that's the other bit, is I think this is back to the what's your intent. My intent here is to try and help all of these groups make a difference. Because I think we've got a limited opportunity to do it.
Brilliant answer, thank you.
Oh.
Could I ask, brilliant talk, thank you very much. With this second project, your repair project,
Yeah.
so many different facets of it. How do you have sort of self-imposed rules to stop yourself spinning off in all directions and to millions of different countries?
Yes and no. So it sort of grew. It was originally just going to be Cuba because I thought that culture was going to disappear with all the overtures Obama was making. That was rudely interrupted by Trump when, within literally a week of him coming to power, he said, now we're going to slap all the embargoes back on Cuba again. And I realized that this was not necessarily the end of repair culture. But I met some people and they said, oh, if you're doing this project on repair, you should go and have a word with these guys here. And it was some people in Brixton. And then that relationship just grew. What I have done is focused specifically on electrical and electronics because it's the least visible to most of us. It's probably the least understood by most. We buy and it's the most damaging in many ways because it's invisible and because all the materials in there are toxic. I mean, that photograph you saw of the mobile phone being taken apart, there are somewhere between 35 and 45 different elements that are needed that have to be extracted from somewhere to go into making that. There are only 80 naturally occurring elements that we actually use. I know there's over 100 elements, but a lot of those are, only being able to be created in the lab. Naturally occurring, there are only about 80, and we use nearly 50 of them to make a mobile phone. So I've tried to focus very much on the electronics, but I have got work in and around other spaces, particularly around, I've not done cars because I think there is a repair culture generally around cars, but I have been looking at things like clothing and upholstering and stuff like that. And in fact, the group up in Manchester, who I'm in discussion with, are interested in me doing some work with them more around fast fashion than anything else. And I might do that, but that's going to be down to whether the two of us get together. But my work is very, very, very focused around electronics. And I'm going to, in terms of putting the work out, nearly all the work, 80–90% of the images when I put the work out are around electrical and electronics for that reason. I'm planning to get create a new project-specific website, and that project-specific website will be very focused around electrical electronics. And that's how I'm trying to, but every now and again, people are trying to drag me away, and I am easily tempted, but I think you've got to keep a focus, because if you don't keep that focus and that intent, you will drift all over the place, and the project then has got no coherence whatsoever. So in essence, my projects looked at as it happens now, I did it in reverse order, but I've explored the problem, the impact that it has, and I've then looked at solutions. And although I didn't show you those images in that form, when the website is reconstructed, it will start off with, this is the impact of electronics and the waste it creates. And then here are some solutions. And it's very deliberately, and in fact, the exhibition that I showed a picture of, they're all designed to show people the range of solutions that are available to them. Because I want people to come away, and actually within the exhibition, I actually give them links via QR codes to places where they can go and get help and information. I want people to walk out of the exhibition thinking, oh, maybe we could do a bit more. And if I get that, great. If I get somebody going, oh, I'm going to have a go at repair, even better.
Mark, that was a great talk, both the photography and the repair and recycling of electronics. You've actually answered the question that I was about to ask you before I asked it, and that is electric cars. We're being told to buy an electric car to save on carbon dioxide, yet in 8 years' time, each electric car will have batteries with 3 kilograms of cobalt, which has nowhere to go. And I hope very much that you'll reverse your decision not to look at cars in the future.
Well, we'll see. I mean, there is actually a potential fix to the lithium-ion batteries. There are people now looking at other ion combinations that aren't lithium cobalt, but are actually lithium-ion or lithium-ion sodium, and they don't have quite the same issues. But you're absolutely right. Cobalt is a nightmare, because a huge amount of the world's cobalt comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Quite.
About a third of their mines are what are known as artisanal mines, which is full of child labor and everything else, and are essentially run by warlords. So there are lots and lots of issues, but there are other issues around. You're right. There are other issues around electric cars. Are electric cars the solution? Well, the answer is only if we solve the problem of how do we repair and recycle electronics properly. Otherwise, all we've actually done is made it even more difficult.
Precisely.
But Elon Musk isn't going to worry about that, because he's making lots of money.
Indeed, which is why I'm hoping that you will devote your attention in about 8 years' time to this.
Well, maybe I will have. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
But thanks again for a great talk.
Great, thanks very much. I guess we ought to probably make that the last one then, because I'm conscious we've got other speakers who need to come on. Jeff, do you want to?
I think that's a good time. Yeah, that's really great. Okay,
thanks,
so
everyone. I should go on mute.
Yeah, we're very interested in your comments with what's coming up, though. So
absolutely, I shall hang around. Don't worry.
Joe, are you around? Joe Court.
Yep. Hi.
Hi there.
Hiya. Hi, everyone.
Are you ready to present your project and perhaps give a little introduction to it?
Yeah. First of all, Mark, I've got a new washing machine coming tomorrow. Anyway, no thanks. It was brilliant. It made me think. The first thing I've got to do is work out how to share my screen. So I'm presuming if I press this and
we normally say when the box comes up, the top left says your screen or your first screen, and that's normally the one to go for.
Okay. Yeah, how's that?
Yep.
You can see my
screen.
little thumbnails there, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me just show you one of them. Here we go. Right, so let me just put you somewhere out of the way. Okay. So I'm working on a new project. I've only visited twice so far, so it's very, very early stages. I'm looking at the life of a 4-year-old boy I first met him January 2019 when he was just a year old. This is him here with his grandmother. And that was right at the beginning. It was about the third day of my year-long project looking at the fruit farm. And I'd gone out on the pheasant shoot that Saturday and I met this young lad. So obviously over the course of that year, working on the farm and the last couple of years collating that work, I've come to know this family very well. And as some of you may have noticed, there she is in my LRPS panel, and there she is in my A panel. So this family on the farm, they go back quite a few generations, and they really, if you buy a Country Farm magazine or a Country Life, it's full of manor homes and landscape gardening and things, but these people really know how to manage the land with their own animals for meat. I don't know, they're just brilliant country people. There she is as a shepherdess in lambing time. Now I want to do this project about this young boy. He's 4 now, he's just turned 4, because I was just looking at his life. I was looking at him in the tractors, I was watching him rolling in the mud with the dog, I was watching him out on the shoots, I was watching him horse riding, all sorts of things, feeding the pig, feeding the sheep. And I just thought, wow, what a wonderful life for a young boy in this day and age. Having been brought up on farms myself, not quite like this, arable farming, but wading in ponds and climbing haystacks and running around feeding the cattle. We had dairy cattle as well. But just even for me now, if I've had 2 weeks where I haven't been in the countryside, I don't necessarily notice it. But when I do then go to the countryside, I just take such a deep breath and think, this is what I need. I actually need it. I can't kind of live without it. I can walk in and out of town. And of course, it's only a small city here where I live, lots of greenery. I'm very lucky. I can walk outside my door and I'm in orchards in no time. But to just make that effort and go somewhere that's very quiet, away from the city, out of the suburbs, even right into the countryside, managed land, farmland, or woodland, but it just does something for me that enables me to live day by day. And I'm just aware of the importance of that, I suppose, to me, not to everybody. Some people I know, they get a kick out of going on holiday to the city. I get a kick out of going on holiday to the mountains. Anyway, so I just wanted to show this little lad. He's now 4, here he is. But what I've done so far is I've only met up with him twice. Now, he hasn't seen me since 2019 when he was a year, and then in the summer he was about 18 months. So the first time he saw me again was on a pheasant shoot a couple of weeks ago. And of course, he's not going to remember me. He's like, who is this? What's she doing? So he comes out of nursery. Here he is just yesterday, actually, came out of nursery with his mother. And the first question he said was, what's she doing, mummy? And of course, he's looking directly at me. So as I say, it's really early on in the project. And then I'm still a very large fly on the wall. I'm very noticeable to the family. So the photographs I've got at the moment, I'm not expecting that they would be of much use. Now, my main aim was thinking of this country life, and that's when he visits his grandparents in the village. But somehow there was part of me that wanted to capture his whole life, his life at home with his mother. Here he is, just come home from nursery in his mother's car, and he spotted his father, and he's going to spend the weekend with his father. And his absolute look of delight on his face as he's seen his dad standing at the side of the road. And I want to capture, not just, I don't know if I'm just getting distracted. I might just be getting distracted, but I'm thinking the whole life of the boy, what it's like for him. His mother actually lives in a small town. His father lives in the countryside. And I just wanted to capture his whole life but really the heart of my project is his country life, what it's like for him when he's with his grandparents. So I don't know if I'm getting distracted. As I say, it's very early days. And the way I wanted, just to say now, the way I wanted to exhibit the work was not to exhibit it, but the way I wanted to get it out there was as a children's storybook, actually, because I guess I'm wanting to spread the good news of country life to families and to children who are maybe spending too much time on screens like I do currently. I think that's what I'd like to do. I'd like to do it as a storybook. So I'm thinking it'd be quite easy to have a storybook of a boy who visits his grandparents in the countryside. But then somehow in my brain, I'm thinking possibly there's a series of books here, just him generally, his life, maybe when he visits his father, maybe his birthday, he starts school this year. I can actually cover quite a lot of this little boy's life over the course of the next 18 months. He starts school, he's going to have birthdays, have Christmas, you know, blah, blah, blah. So I've got quite a lot of work there. It might be too much for me and I might drop some of it. We'll see how it goes. But this day, there he is, he's coming from nursery, just needs something to eat, just basic things. I'm just, at the moment, I'm trying to get family used to me being around. I just need to take photographs. They need to hear the click, the shutter. They just need to be settled with me so that their behaviour is normal. There he is giving his mum a hug before going away with his father here, is waiting with the open door of his car, saying bye-bye to his mum for the weekend. And here we are on the pheasant shoot. He's sitting in the tractor, that's his granddad and his gran. They're very comfortable with me on the pheasant shoot because it was actually something I covered early 2019 as a sideline, as a very small aspect of the farm project. So I was very familiar with these people. I haven't seen them in 2.5 years, but they were, you know, it was very comfortable. That wasn't difficult. There he is with his dog. So they're a lot more comfortable with me here, except for the mother, who I don't know as well. There he is on his grand shoulders. Obviously, if I'm doing a children's storybook, I've got the issues of making it palatable to the general public. So I don't know. That's another question in itself. No, you know, would you put that in a children's storybook? There he is on his mum's walkie-talkie out on the shoot, and there he is telling his little friend there that he's got Spider-Man boots. He's using his boots to good use. Look, and then just thinking of, I mean, I just did this literally in 10 minutes this morning. There he is in the fridge. I just picked out one image, and I thought, well, how am I going to? I am an artist actually. I paint as well. I haven't done that for many years, but I could illustrate the images rather than using photographs. I could draw them. I could use the photographs to draw from. There he is, look, with his nan there, and I could do a children's book like that. I could drop luminosity maybe in Photoshop and then use my tablet to draw somehow and to paint over the images. I'm not sure about keeping his face entirely. I don't know whether or not to make it more cartoony. I mean, it's a project. If I do the storybook, then I need to consider changing his. Do I want to change his name? Do I want to make it more anonymous? But I would still have a set of photographs that maybe could be used for something else, less kind of public, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, yeah. So you can hear, as you can hear, I'm still thinking through lots of things. Do I cover his whole life? Do I just stay in the countryside? This Tuesday I'm going, he's going to go horse riding with his nan. I'm going to go and see them do that. I'm hoping to hang around and just watch him go back to her house with a fire and a cup of cocoa and rolling with a dog and just general life. That's really, I want them very comfortable with me just being amongst them, almost as part of the family. And I'm sure that will come over the next couple of months. The little Charlie will get used to me. His mother will get used to me. His grandmother's already used to me. Yeah, so that's it. That's my project. Let me just check. There's nothing in particular.
Okay. Well,
I haven't done a lot of research yet. I do plan to. If anybody knows of any photographers who have done anything similar, I'd be very interested to hear some names. I would like to do a little bit of research.
so are you looking for people to give you help with, I'm talking about the people here,
Yeah.
to give you help with the direction of the project or to comment
Yeah,
on it?
I'm just kind of sharing where I'm at with it at the moment, what I hope to do. And if you've got any comments or things you think when I was sharing, you think, oh gosh, that could be a problem, or how you're going to go about that, or and any comments or advice would be very grateful at this stage, at this very early stage. It would be very helpful. Yeah.
Okay. Well, does anyone like to comment?
So, have you looked at the work of Tim Goodall?
No, thank you, Stuart.
That's okay. So Tim Goodall was one of the first photojournalists in the 1930s to start creating work in the way that we do with small cameras. And in the 1950s, he created a series of books called My Village. So My Village in England, My Village in Austria, Greece, India, Ireland, and so forth. He made about sort of 20 of these. Now, what he did was he went to a village and focused on a teenager, really, but told the story of life in that village centered around that individual, almost as the main character in the story. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Jeff, can I just share my screen just very briefly and show Joe what I'm talking about?
Absolutely.
Well,
Joe, can you stop sharing and then Stuart
How
can
do
share?
I do that? Let me have a look.
There should be a bar somewhere with a red button on the end of it that says shop. Yeah.
Great.
Excellent, thank you. So, yeah, so I'm just going to the screen now. So can you see My Village in England?
Stuart, have you shown me this before? I recognise that.
I have. That's why I asked you the question. But
oh gosh! All right, I really must.
So if I just flick through a couple of pages, so you can see this one in my. Well, let me just go back to where I was just for a moment, because you can see the series of books that he created in different countries. And if we move forwards a couple of pages, you can now see that here he's focusing on Nicholas Lansbury, who is in Grafton, Temple Grafton. Now, I went to Temple Grafton about 4 months ago, and the village has completely changed. So I went to the school and I spoke to the secretary. I could create a similar project in Temple Grafton, but it wouldn't be anything like Tim Goodall's project because times have changed. If I flick through the pages just for a few moments, because there's a particular shot that I want to get up to. So sitting around the table eating tea, how many people get time to do that now? And look at that, a schoolroom. What's missing? Computers, of course, iPads. So it's this, I'll just stop sharing now, but that gives you an idea of what I'm talking about. So what you're maybe capturing is life in a village today, or even life. I'm trying to work out the correct way of saying, but he's got two families almost, hasn't he? He's got the family with his mother and his family with his father. And we're talking about Tim Goodall working 70 years ago. I grew up in the 60s, so I can identify with some of the scenes in his books from the 50s. In 70 years' time, there might not be such a thing as mum and dad. It might be a convention which no longer exists. So maybe your story is not purely just him, but life that everybody lives, maybe through the eyes of this youngster.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I am thinking I would like to get into his nursery, and then he starts school in the autumn. Obviously, I'd need a lot of permissions. I've worked in a school. I know
Yeah.
how difficult it is, especially with the new GDPR and things. I don't know if anyone's got any advice. I was thinking I might even need to get a solicitor to help me, just to make sure I'm not falling down any holes and help me form my permission letters. I don't know if that's necessary or if I'm just being a bit OTT.
You might find some advice on the Office of the Information Commissioner.
On the, sorry?
The Office of the Information Commissioner.
Thank you. I'll write that down.
Mark, did you have something?
Yeah, I was just thinking of a bit like we were talking there about, other work, not farm-based, but work that's focused on an individual where the individual's a minor, because obviously that brings it. Sean Davey, Martha, would be worth an explore.
Sean,
Sean, S-S-I-A-N, and then Davies, D-A-V-E-Y, and the project was called Martha. It came out as a book. I mean, the one other issue that you will clearly need to think about, which I know you're sort of aware of, is, if you're looking to get it published, there are lots of issues in and around your subject is a minor, and how that is consented, bearing in mind how young they are. But yeah, that's the one thing I can think of is Sean Davies' work. Just trying to think if there's anybody else that I know that's done. It's not an area that I've looked at. I mean, one thing when I talked about I do research, one of the other things I often do just on the research front when it comes to photography, I mean, as well as doing the right thing you're doing here, which is asking loads of people, do they know? I have, for a couple of my projects, actually, because I'm a member of the Martin Parr Foundation as well as the RPS, I will actually go down to the Martin Parr Foundation and go through their library. Oh. And in fact, the very last time I did that, which was a couple of years ago now, I was quite lucky, was that their archivist, who was supposed to be taking me through, was ill. So I actually had 3 hours of Martin Parr himself acting as my research assistant, which was brilliant. He also makes half decent cups of tea. But, places like that can often be quite useful places to go. The other thing to maybe look at, this is not necessarily a plug, on the RPS website, on the documentary website, we've got a section called resources. And in the resources bit, we've got lists of loads and loads and loads of photo books, for one thing. I mean, there's probably, I'm going to guess, 120 to 150 of them there now. And then we're not saying that any of them are anything particular, but the other thing that's there is we provided a list of online archives. And so one thing you might want to look at doing is having a look at the online archives are there, and then maybe just doing a look through. You might find something. If you put some keywords in some of the searches, it might lead you to someone that's also worth looking at. Because I think you're right to do the research. I think you need to look at what and how people have dealt with this before, and then you're probably going to need to do some research around, understanding the issues and the challenges in terms of getting the work out there. And then the other bit of research then obviously is what's the backstory in and around this that ties it all together.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. I've written that all down.
Cool.
I was thinking if I did it as a children's picture book, I was thinking that if I illustrated it by hand, and changed his name, because yes, his parents and his grandparents might all be fine with it, but how's he going to feel when he's an adult?
Correct. Yeah, that's the other issue. I think that's probably a smart move. And so what you're actually essentially saying is this is research material in a way for something that's illustrated. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a recent case in the US, if any of you remember the Nirvana, I think it was the Nirvana album with the baby swimming.
Oh, yeah.
And that baby is now an adult and is now trying to sue. Has tried to sue.
Has tried, yeah, he failed.
He failed, yes.
no.
That was in the US. And that was in the US. But,
I don't plan on getting any private bits showing. I don't want to humiliate him. But what I think isn't humiliating in 15 years' time actually could be humiliating in their eyes. That people's opinions and attitudes change. So in 15 years' time, when he's 18, the pictures I have that are totally acceptable today may no longer be. So I do think I need to bear that in mind. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Has anyone else got anything? to help? Okay, well, thanks, Joe. Thanks for
Great,
sharing
thank
that.
you, everyone. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, really interesting.
Yeah. So, so the next thing really, Jan, you're going to talk about what's coming up with our group and what we plan to do as a group project.
Yeah, I'd like to just before I share the screen, because I've put it all on the screen, I got a kick in the rear when Mark came online straight away, because I suddenly realized we're thinking of a project, but we really ought to have an intent. So I had.
They did the quick editing.
I mean, our intent was
excellent. Sign up for the course. That'll
We're
sort you out.
fast learners, Mark. You know that.
our intent was to have a project,
Very good.
which is documentary, which means really we didn't have an intent. Anyway, so what I've put together, we've been inspired quite a bit in the recent years of this group, in particularly by Janie, and by we had Sheila last meeting, and we did a project earlier on Britain. So what I do, I'll show our project, I'll share the screen, and I'll go through it. So our proposed group project was, and this is where the intent came in, to show the community values revealed in local voluntary organizations, such as groups, institutions, charities, clubs, festivals, and all sorts. And examples we have like Camera Club, Repair Shop, Amateur Dramatics, choirs, music, sport, etc. The outcome was really meant to be a book, online exhibition. We have this wonderful exhibition software that we've used in the Camera Club, and a physical exhibition, AV. We're not really, and the idea being to, in a way, have about 5 images with text from each contributor, and then take about a year to do it. So that was that's it in a nutshell. And because there is the whole point, and I really like to reinforce the intent. The real intent is to show that there's a huge amount of institutions, clubs, and charities in our community who really are the fabric of our local communities in all sorts of areas, which would be wonderful to document. I mean, I know some of the projects that Janie's done are examples of this, and Sheila's repair shop in a church, and we have a project on the go in the Chichester Camera Club, is to sort of put together, a documentary contribution on this, and then in a way make a compilation of all these. So that's my our proposal we discussed. So,
I think the other thing, Jan, we were thinking that we wanted people to be able to have access to something they could go back to over a period of time, and so that really led us towards local things, rather than something where you have to go traveling. It'd be nice to go to Cuba every other week, Mark, but a lot of us can't. A lot of us can't. So
neither could I found other ways of funding it, but let's not go there.
And then the other thing was, as Jeff says, that something also that could be developed by the individuals to make something more elaborate and really give us the essence to put together in a group project. So it does mean that it's not just for 5 pictures in a little book that gets lost, but also could be the basis of a personal project. Okay.
I think in some ways we're thinking they might be personal projects that people in the group do, that they just submit 5 photos into a group exhibition or project. And like Jan says, we've Chichester Camera Club has used the online exhibition software a couple of times now, and And it has the great advantage of, you know, if we publicize it, then we can get a lot more people to go to that than we can to a local exhibition. So I think we're quite keen to do that, to use that sort of technology to get the images out more. So I'm going to email this to everyone on my mailing list, aren't I? And we're going to arrange a Zoom session if we get interest coming back. So if people respond to that mailing, then we'll set up a Zoom session to address that issue, won't we? Yeah.
Yeah, and what I really wanted to have a kind of show of hands, how many people of our 22 on the screen would be interested to contribute without really knowing what they're going to do or what they, you know, whatever. So I'm keen to have a go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Richard, David, Bill, nice to see Bill, and who else I've got? I saw some hands somewhere.
I mean, obviously, we've got some people in the meeting who aren't really in our group, but
yeah,
they're welcome to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Joe, that's good.
And John Bickerdike, I see that.
John, yeah.
Yeah.
And in the Scotland, yeah, I mean, we're not anywhere because it is, I think my feeling about it, that's why I'd be very keen to sort of try and run it, is to make sure it is it reinforces the values of community and care and empathy between people locally, and in a way is a step against this egocentric society we are moving into. So it's really because there is a huge number of, I mean, I've just down the road, our local model railway club they've just laid new tracks, really exciting things going on down there, just, you know, 300 yards from where we're living. So so it looks as though we've got a reasonable number. You know, we don't really know until we've put it together a little more and discussed it. So if that's right, Jeff, we send out a message. We ask for people to respond and come with some ideas of what they would like to contribute. And I see that some already have projects. I think quite a few probably have projects that we can use in the skate. I see the skate community.
Mm.
I mean, that's magnificent kind of, because again, we've got to think about it, got to be visually kind of exciting. I mean, with all right, with the embroidery club and stuff, you know,
we've got to get down with the kids, haven't we, Jan?
Yeah. So that's it.
That's good.
I think that's a great idea. Just like from my perspective, I think, and I know Stuart's done similar projects that are, you know, local, very local, with groups in his own region, and I would definitely support it. I mean, mine's focused on a topic. Yes, I do get to travel around a bit, and these days, though, I've really honed in, and it's much more in the UK than it was then. But I think what you're doing, I think it's really, really good. I think these are things that, because there's so many different angles you can come at it. You know, there are so many local volunteer groups, and some of them are, you know, are nationally coordinated, but a lot of them are just hyper local. They're just a group of people doing their own local thing, and I think it'd be great. The thing that I think would be worth doing, a little bit like I do with some of the charities and groups I do, is I usually, in inverted commas, gift them a number of images with a Creative Commons license on it that they can use, but they need to credit me, you know, so that they can use them for their own publicity. And I think, you know, more often than not, they're really, really happy for me to do that, and it just gives you really, really good access, rather than you being the, you know, the completely external observer with no interest. Doing stuff like that also makes life so much easier for you.
Yeah, I found that out from our local Women's Institute, who were so chuffed when I took a series of pictures of their tea party against sewage on the beaches and Extinction Rebellion climate sort of tea party. And I got loads of friends from the Women's Institute now. So
Careful.
Tell your wife.
I'm in the right generation.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I think, and if we get a good sort of patchwork of things, it'll make I think a development from our project a few years ago of a slice of Britain. It'll be more focused on the sort of, as I said, the community values and the importance to individuals helping each other kind of stuff.
And I think what you're looking at is community resilience, aren't you?
Yeah.
And that sort of resilience to being sat on a computer all the time.
Yeah.
Something. I gave you a link to a book that we've just done within the region. It was part of a wider project. Mark said at the beginning that the East Midlands region is quite big, but it doesn't stretch to Belgium. But we've got people, photographers from Benelux, who have contributed to it. So if you are stretching it to foreigners, then I'd be more than happy to try and contribute to it.
Yeah.
That'd be lovely. And I think Tracy has said she's in Scotland, but you'd be very welcome as well, Tracy.
And Ronnie, and Janie, we're not afraid of dogs in the project. You know, they're and we even have a bounce group around here doing. You know, so there's such a lot to do. Okay, I think we're about done. Unless anyone's got anything else. Thanks again, Mark. I really enjoyed the talk. I thought. You know, I love the way you explained the intent and all the stuff, and it's given me quite a lot to think about. And I'm sure that people who have missed the talk and get to see the recording will enjoy it as well.
Great. Well, thanks very much for having me. Keep going, because you do great as a group, as some of our regional subgroups go. I think you are by far the most active. So keep it going. Great, and great to hear about your project. I think doing a local project and trying to show the work of voluntary groups and community resilience and all those other things you want to call it, I think it's a really great idea, because there's so many different angles that you can come from. And there'll be loads and loads and loads of other groups. And you can even tap into things like, you know, that are nationally run as well, like, you know, St. John's Ambulance and stuff. There's just so many angles you can take it. So yeah, great. Well done.
Great.
Next meeting, Jeff or
Richard.
Richard.
Do you want to talk about that, Jan, or shall I?
Richard, you're the expert on date.
Okay. The next two meetings, we're going to do photo walks. First one will be on the 19th of March in Brighton. More details to follow, and there'll be another one in May, sometime in the middle of May. It's another Saturday.
And I'm hoping that one to be in London, aren't we, Richard?
Yeah. Yes, we are. Yeah.
And I mean, we may have a Zoom meeting in between that, which will be focused on our project, and we'll just have them as required, rather than have a speaker and things like that, but just to focus on the project, because I don't think we can do that in the photo walk sessions.
Yeah.
Great. Well done, everyone.
Okay. Thanks very much for coming.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks,
everyone.
Right.
Should we
Thanks.
just hang on, Jeff and
Sure.
Richard?
Yeah.
Bye, folks. Nice to see you.
Bye, everyone.
Saturday.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for showing it, Joe.
That's right. Thank you.
You might want to stop recording, Jeff.